A peasant sheltered a lost rider. She never suspected he was a duke in disguise. What happened next shocked everyone in the village. Before we begin, let us know in the comments what city you are watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Once upon a time, in a land where mountains touched the clouds and forests grew thick with ancient trees, there lived a poor peasant girl named Mariska, who dwelt in a small cottage at the edge of the forest. Her parents had passed away when she was but a child, taken by the fever that had swept through the village one terrible winter, and so she lived alone and made her living by spinning wool and tending to a small vegetable garden behind her humble home. The villagers knew her as a kind and honest girl who never complained about her poor circumstances, though she had much reason to do so. She would share her meager bread with beggars who passed by her cottage, even when her own stomach growled with hunger. She would offer water from her well to any traveler who asked, drawing it up herself with the old rope that had belonged to her father. The priest, a kindly old man who had known her parents, said she had the purest heart in all the village, perhaps in all the province. Though she owned nothing but a worn dress that had been mended many times, a spinning wheel that creaked with each turn, a spotted cow named Daisy, 3 brown chickens that pecked about her yard, and her small cottage with its thatched roof that sometimes leaked when the rains came hard, she was content with her lot. She never envied the wealthy merchants who passed through the village in their fine carriages, nor did she covet the pretty dresses the baker's daughters wore to church on Sundays. Every morning she would wake before dawn, when the sky was still purple with night and the first birds had not yet begun their songs, to tend her garden. She would pull weeds from around her carrots and cabbages, water the tender shoots, and speak gentle words to the plants, for her mother had taught her that growing things responded to kindness. Every evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and red, she would sit at her spinning wheel by candlelight, her fingers moving with practiced grace, spinning wool into thread to earn enough coins to buy flour and salt at the market. Her cottage was small but clean, with a stone hearth where a fire crackled on cold nights, a rough wooden table where she took her simple meals, and a narrow bed in the corner covered with a quilt her mother had sewn. On the wall hung her father's old shirt, which she could not bear to part with, and above the door hung a dried sprig of lavender for luck. It was not much, but it was home, and Mariska loved it dearly. One autumn day, when the leaves had turned gold and crimson and the air held the first bite of coming winter, dark clouds gathered over the distant mountains and began to roll across the sky like a great gray blanket. The wind began to howl through the trees, making them bend and creak, and the birds fell silent as if sensing the danger that approached. Mariska looked up from her spinning wheel, her skilled hands pausing mid-twist, and said to herself in a voice filled with concern, "A terrible storm is coming, and any traveler caught on the road will surely perish in the cold and rain." Without wasting another moment, she hurried outside to bring her chickens into the cottage, clucking at them and herding them with her skirts. They fluttered and squawked in protest, for they did not like to be disturbed from their pecking and scratching, but Mariska was gentle yet firm. Then she led her cow Daisy into the small shed beside her home, giving the animal extra hay and speaking soothing words. The cow mooed softly, her large brown eyes seeming to understand the kindness being shown to her. Then Mariska gathered extra firewood from the small stack behind her cottage, making trip after trip until her arms ached, and stacked it carefully by the hearth so that her fire would burn bright and warm through the night. The wind was growing stronger now, whistling through the cracks in the walls and rattling the shutters. She checked the thatch on her roof, making sure it was secured, and brought in her washing from the line. The old willow tree beside her well, which had stood there since before Mariska was born, spoke to her in its rustling, whispering voice. "You are wise to prepare for this storm, dear child, for it will be the worst we have seen in many years. The very earth will tremble with its fury." Mariska thanked the willow tree for its warning, for she had learned long ago to listen to the voices of the forest, as her mother had taught her to do. The tree had never been wrong before, and she trusted its ancient wisdom. She made sure her cottage door could be opened easily from both inside and out, should anyone come seeking shelter, for she would never forgive herself if a traveler perished because they could not gain entry. She filled a large pot with water from her well and set it to boil over the fire for soup, adding what vegetables she had, a few carrots, an onion, some cabbage, thinking to herself, if someone comes, I must have something warm to offer them, for a hot meal can save a life on such a night as this will be. As darkness fell like a heavy curtain and the storm began to rage with terrible fury, rain pouring from the sky in sheets and lightning splitting the heavens with brilliant white fire, a young man on horseback became lost in the forest. He had been riding for 3 long days, sleeping rough beneath the stars when he could, and had strayed far from the main road while trying to avoid the towns where he might be recognized. The rain poured down upon him with merciless force, soaking through his fine cloak, though it was now so covered in mud that its quality was hidden and running in cold rivulets down his back. His horse, a magnificent black stallion that had served him faithfully, stumbled on the treacherous path and could go no further, its head hanging low with exhaustion. Where am I? The young man wondered, his teeth chattering with cold. I cannot see the path ahead through this cursed rain, and my horse is too weary to continue. We shall both die out here if I cannot find shelter soon. Just then, when hope was nearly lost and he had begun to resign himself to a miserable night huddled beneath a tree, he saw a small light flickering through the dark trees like a beacon of salvation. It was the warm, welcoming glow of a candle in Mariska's window. The young man led his exhausted horse toward the light, stumbling over roots and rocks he could not see in the darkness, pushing through wet branches that slapped at his face. He was the Duke of the Northern Province, ruler of thousands, with a palace that had 50 rooms and servants who attended to his every need. But he wore no jewels or marks of his station, for he had been traveling in secret, dressed as a common man. He had heard whispers and complaints that his stewards were cruel to the peasants, extracting heavy taxes and showing no mercy to those who could not pay, and he wished to see the truth with his own eyes, rather than relying on the reports of men who might have reason to deceive him. Now he was lost and cold and desperate for shelter, brought low by nature's fury, and in that moment his title meant nothing. He was simply a man in need of help, and that humble cottage light was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The Duke knocked upon Mariska's door with a heavy hand, barely able to make his frozen fingers form a fist. The wind howled around him, and the rain pelted his back. She opened it at once, and saw before her a young man drenched to the bone, water streaming from his hair and clothes, leading a trembling horse that looked ready to collapse. Her heart went out to him immediately. Come in," she said without a moment's hesitation, reaching out to pull him inside. "You'll catch your death in this storm. Don't stand there another moment." The Duke, surprised by her immediate kindness to a stranger, said through chattering teeth, "I have no money to pay you for shelter. I was robbed on the road 2 days ago." Mariska replied with simple honesty, opening the door wider. No traveler should be turned away on such a night as this. Money matters not at all when a life is at stake. She led his horse to her small shed beside her cow, moving quickly through the driving rain, and gave the exhausted animal hay and fresh water from her well. She rubbed the horse down with an old cloth, speaking gently to calm it, for the poor creature was trembling with cold and fear. Then she brought the Duke inside and said, "Sit by the fire and warm yourself before you turn to ice. You're shivering so badly I can hear your teeth knocking together." She gave him a thick woolen blanket, rough but warm, and her own dry shirt that had belonged to her father, kept all these years though it still brought tears to her eyes to see it. "Take off those wet clothes before you fall ill," she commanded, turning her back to give him privacy. "Hang them by the fire to dry." The Duke did as he was told, grateful beyond measure for her kindness, and wrapped himself in the blanket. The warmth of the fire began to seep into his frozen bones, and he thought he had never felt anything so wonderful. Mariska ladled out soup from her pot, the steam rising in fragrant curls, and gave him a generous bowl with a piece of her precious bread, though it meant she would have less for herself tomorrow. "Eat and drink," she said kindly. "You must be hungry from your journey. The storm will pass, but you need strength to endure it." The Duke took the bowl with trembling hands and began to eat, too cold and grateful to speak, and thought that her simple cottage felt more like home than his grand palace ever had. The Duke ate the simple soup, nothing but vegetables and water with a pinch of salt, and found it more delicious than any feast he had ever eaten in his palace, where cooks prepared elaborate dishes with exotic spices and rare ingredients. Perhaps it was the cold and hunger that made it taste so good, or perhaps it was the knowledge that it was given freely and with genuine kindness. But he savored every spoonful and scraped the bowl clean. "What is your name?" he asked, looking at his rescuer in the firelight. She was a young woman, perhaps 20 years of age, with a kind face and gentle eyes that held no guile or calculation. Her hands were rough from work, but her movements were graceful. "I am called Mariska, and I live here alone," she replied. "My parents are gone these 10 years, taken by fever." "And what is your name, traveler?" The Duke hesitated for a moment, for he could not give his true title without revealing his identity and perhaps changing how she treated him. He wanted to know her as she truly was, without the curtsying and fear that his title inspired. Then he said, "Call me Janos." That was the name his nursemaid had called him as a child, before he became Duke, when he was just a small boy who scraped his knees and cried when he fell. It was true enough, for it had been his name once. Mariska smiled and said, "You may sleep by the fire tonight, Janos. I have only one bed, you see, but it is cold, and you need the warmth more than I do after being out in that terrible storm." The Duke protested, for he was raised with manners despite his title. "I cannot take your bed. You have already been too kind. I will not put you out of your own bed." Mariska insisted, her voice firm but gentle. "The fire will keep me warm enough. I have slept in my chair before when I was ill. You are my guest and must be comfortable. It is no hardship at all." So the Duke slept by the warm fire, wrapped in her blanket and listening to the storm rage outside, while Mariska wrapped herself in her shawl and rested in a wooden chair, her head leaning against the wall. All through the night the storm raged with terrible fury, shaking the cottage and howling like a wolf. But inside all was peaceful and warm. The Duke slept better than he had in months, without the weight of his duties pressing on his mind, and dreamed of nothing at all. When morning arrived at last, pale and gray, the storm had passed but left destruction in its wake. The forest paths were muddy and treacherous, filled with fallen branches and deep puddles. The Duke woke to find Mariska already awake, her face fresh despite her uncomfortable night in the chair, tending to the fire and preparing porridge in a small pot. The smell of cooking oats filled the cottage, simple but comforting. "Good morning, Janos," she said cheerfully when she heard him stir. "I hope you slept well. You were not too cold?" The Duke sat up, feeling more rested than he had felt in a very long time, and said, "I slept better than I have in months, better than I sleep in my own." He caught himself, "Better than I sleep anywhere. You have been very kind to a stranger. You did not have to take me in." Mariska smiled, a warm expression that lit her face, and said, "It is no hardship to help another soul. We are all travelers in this world, are we not? Today you needed help. Tomorrow I may need help from another. That is how we survive." She gave him porridge with a precious bit of honey drizzled on top, a luxury she rarely allowed herself, and said, "Your horse needs rest. The poor creature was exhausted when you arrived. The paths are too dangerous today anyway, with all the mud and fallen trees. If you wish, you may stay another day until the roads are safe for travel." The Duke looked at this simple peasant girl, with her worn dress and work-roughened hands, and marveled at her generous spirit. She had so little, yet she gave so freely. He said, "I would be grateful to stay if I am not a burden to you. I do not wish to eat your food and take advantage of your kindness." Mariska replied, sitting down to her own small bowl of porridge, "You are no burden at all. In fact, I would welcome the company. It has been long since I had someone to talk with. The days grow lonely sometimes, with only my chickens and cow for conversation, though they are dear companions." They ate together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, and the Duke felt something he had not felt in years: peace. Outside, the world was muddy and broken, but inside this small cottage, all was well. So the Duke stayed another day, and then another after that, for the paths remained treacherous. He helped Mariska with her chores, carrying water from the well in heavy wooden buckets and chopping firewood with her old axe. He had never done such work before in his pampered life, having always had servants to do everything for him, but he found to his surprise that he enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about the ache in his muscles, the honest sweat on his brow, the tangible results of his labor. Mariska showed him how to feed the chickens, scattering grain while making little clucking sounds that brought them running, and how to milk the cow, pulling gently on the teats in a steady rhythm until milk streamed into the pail. "You learn quickly, Janos," she said with a musical laugh. "Have you never worked with your hands before? You seemed so awkward at first. But now look at you," the Duke said carefully, not wanting to lie but not wanting to reveal the truth. "I have lived a different sort of life until now, a life that did not require such skills." They worked together in comfortable silence, and when the afternoon came and the day's tasks were done, they sat by the fire and Mariska taught him how to spin wool, her fingers demonstrating the quick, practiced movements that turned raw wool into thread. "Your hands are soft," she observed, taking his hand to examine it with innocent curiosity. "You have not done hard labor before. There are no calluses at all." The Duke replied, "That is true, but I find I like learning these things. There is value in work I never understood before," Mariska said, her voice holding the wisdom passed down from her mother. "Honest work is good for the soul. That is what my mother always told me. It connects us to the earth and to life. A person who does not work does not truly live." The Duke thought about his life in the palace, filled with idle nobles who spent their days gossiping and scheming, servants who did everything while he signed papers and attended ceremonies, and he began to understand what she meant. He had been alive but not truly living. That evening, as they sat by the fire with the door closed against the cool night air and the candle burning low, Mariska asked, "Tell me, Janos, where do you come from? What is your home like?" The Duke chose his words carefully, walking the line between truth and deception. "I come from the north, from the Duke's territory. My home is large, too large sometimes. A person can get lost in it." "What brings you so far from home?" Mariska asked, her hands busy with her spinning even as she talked. The Duke said, and this was true, "I wanted to see the land and understand how people truly live. I felt disconnected. I wanted to know truth rather than what people chose to tell me." Mariska nodded wisely and said, "That is a noble desire. Too many people never look beyond their own circumstances. They live their whole lives in one place, knowing only one way of being. But you seek understanding. That is rare." She then told him about her life, speaking with simple honesty. She told him how her parents had died when she was but 10 years old, how the village had wanted to send her to the poorhouse but the priest had spoken for her, how she had managed to keep her cottage and survive through hard work and determination. She told him how she lived alone but found joy in simple things, the first flower of spring, the satisfaction of a full larder, the song of birds at dawn. The Duke listened and felt deeply ashamed that he had never truly known the struggles of his people. He had known they were poor, of course, but he had never truly understood what that meant. Mariska said, her face peaceful in the firelight. "But I am fortunate. I have shelter and food and my health. Many have far less. There are people who sleep in ditches and beg for crusts of bread. I have so much in comparison." The Duke marveled at her contentment despite her poverty, at how she could have so little yet feel so rich. He said, "You have a good heart, Mariska. You are rich in ways that gold cannot measure," she replied simply, not understanding the depth of what he meant. "I only try to live as my parents taught me. They said that kindness costs nothing but is worth everything." The next morning, the third since he had arrived, the paths were dry and safe for travel. The sun shone bright, and the mud had hardened. The Duke knew he should continue his journey through the province, for he had much more to see and learn, but he found himself reluctant to leave this peaceful cottage and this kind woman. Mariska said, though her voice held a note of regret, "The roads are clear now, Janos. You can safely return to your home. Your family must be worried about you." The Duke replied, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Would you mind if I stayed a few more days? I could help you with the heavy work. I noticed your fence needs mending and your shed roof has a leak. You have been so kind to me, and I would like to repay you if I can." Mariska was surprised but clearly pleased. "You are welcome to stay as long as you wish, but I cannot pay you for your work. I have barely enough coins to feed myself." The Duke laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "I do not seek payment. Your company and your kindness are worth more than coins. I enjoy the work and the peace here. If you will have me, I will stay and help." So the Duke remained at the cottage, his journey temporarily forgotten. Each day he worked alongside Marischka, learning the rhythms of peasant life that he had never known, despite ruling over thousands of peasants. He repaired the fence around her garden, replacing rotten posts and strengthening weak sections. He fixed the leaking roof of her shed, climbing up with bundles of fresh thatch. He strengthened her cottage door, which had been hanging crooked on its hinges, and oiled the hinges of her shutters so they no longer squeaked. Marischka was grateful for his help, for these were tasks she could not do alone, and she enjoyed having someone to share meals with, someone to talk to in the evenings. The Duke found himself settling into this simple life with surprising ease. He woke with the sun, worked hard during the day, ate simple food that tasted better than palace feasts, and slept soundly at night. He had never been happier, and that realization both pleased and troubled him. What did it say about his life as Duke that he was happiest living as a peasant? As the days passed, one after another in peaceful succession, the Duke found himself growing fond of Marischka in a way he had never felt for any woman before. She was unlike any woman he had known at court, where ladies wore elaborate gowns and spoke in carefully calculated phrases, always angling for position or favor. She spoke plainly and honestly, saying exactly what she meant, never trying to flatter or deceive. She never asked him for anything, never hinted that he owed her something for her kindness. She found joy in simple things that nobles would never notice. A sunny morning that promised a good day for drying laundry, a particularly good harvest of carrots from her garden, the cheerful songs of birds in the willow tree. She would laugh at small things, her laughter bright and genuine, and she would hum while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. One day, as they worked together in the garden, pulling weeds and thinning the rows of vegetables, she said, "I am glad you lost your way in the storm, Janos. It has been wonderful to have a friend. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came." The Duke's heart stirred at her words, at the simple affection in her voice. He said, "I too am glad, though I am sorry to have imposed on you for so long. You have shared your home and your food when you had so little to share." Marischka laughed, her hands busy in the dirt. "You are not an imposition. You work harder than any man I have known. You have fixed things I could never fix alone. And besides, I enjoy your company. You are kind, and you listen when I speak." That night, as the Duke lay by the fire wrapped in his blanket, he thought, "I have fallen in love with this peasant girl, but how can I tell her the truth about who I am? She loves me for who I am, or who she thinks I am, a common man named Janos. If she knew I was the Duke, everything would change." He wrestled with his conscience. Every day his deception grew heavier. He wanted to tell her the truth, but he feared losing what they had. In his palace, women had pursued him for his title, his wealth, his power. Marischka loved him for himself, knowing nothing of his rank. That was precious beyond measure, and he could not bear to lose it. One morning, after the Duke had been staying with Marischka for nearly 3 weeks, she said, "Today is market day in the village. I must go to sell my wool and buy supplies. I have spun a good amount this past week, and we need flour and salt and perhaps some beans if I can afford them. Will you come with me, Janos? I would value the company on the walk." The Duke agreed readily, for he was curious to see the village and wanted to observe how his subjects lived without being recognized. They walked together along the forest path, a journey of about an hour, carrying the basket of wool she had spun. The morning was pleasant, with a gentle breeze and birds singing in the trees. Marischka talked cheerfully about the villagers, describing their characters and quirks with affectionate humor. At the market, which was held in the village square around the old well, the villagers greeted Marischka warmly. "Good morning, Marischka," they called out. "Who is this young man with you? We have never seen him before." "This is Janos," Marischka replied with a smile. "He has been helping me with my cottage in exchange for room and board. He was lost in the storm several weeks ago and has stayed to help me." The villagers nodded their approval, for they could see the young man was respectful and hard-working. As they walked through the market, looking at the various stalls selling bread and cheese and vegetables and cloth, the Duke saw things that made his heart heavy. He saw how poorly the people lived, how thin the children looked, their arms and legs like sticks. He saw how worn and patched the adults' clothing was, how tired they appeared even in the morning. He saw an old man selling bruised apples for a few copper coins, his face lined with years of hardship. He felt anger rising in him like a tide. Where were his stewards? Why were the taxes so heavy that these people could barely afford bread? He had suspected corruption, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. These were his people, his responsibility, and they were suffering. Mariska noticed his dark expression and asked with concern, "What troubles you, Janos? You look as if you have seen something terrible," he said, struggling to keep his voice calm. "I see much suffering here. How do they endure it?" She replied gently, "It has always been this way for us. But we endure because we must. What choice do we have?" At the market square, near the old stone fountain that had stood there for 100 years, they encountered the Duke's chief steward, a cruel man named Lord Kovacs, who was collecting taxes with several armed guards standing behind him. The Duke recognized him immediately and felt his stomach clench with dread. He pulled his cap lower over his face and stayed behind Mariska, hoping not to be recognized. Lord Kovacs was a tall man with a thin face and cold eyes that held no mercy. He shouted at an old woman who stood before him with trembling hands, "You must pay 3 more silver coins or your cottage will be seized. The tax has increased again, and you owe the Duke his due." The old woman wept, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I have no more coins, my lord. I have given everything I have. My children are gone and I live alone. I cannot pay what I do not have." Lord Kovacs sneered, his lip curling with contempt. "Then you will be thrown out into the street. Perhaps that will teach you to work harder instead of making excuses. The guards will come tomorrow to take possession of your cottage." The old woman fell to her knees, begging, "Please, my lord, have mercy. I have lived in that cottage for 50 years. Where will I go?" Mariska, unable to stand by and watch such cruelty, stepped forward with her gentle courage. "Please, sir, show mercy. She is old and has no family to help her. Surely you can give her more time to gather the coins." Lord Kovacs turned his cold eyes on Mariska, looking at her as if she were dirt beneath his boots. "And who are you to speak? If you interfere, I will double her taxes. Mind your own business, girl, or you will regret it." The Duke felt rage boiling inside him like lava, barely contained. He wanted to reveal himself, to strip this cruel man of his position immediately. But he held his tongue. If he revealed himself now, it would expose his deception to Mariska, and he was not ready for that. He whispered to Mariska, "Give me the coins you earned from your wool. All of them." She looked at him with surprise but trusted him and handed over the small leather pouch containing her earnings. The Duke stepped forward and paid the old woman's taxes, pressing the coins into Lord Kovacs's greedy hand. Lord Kovacs took the money with a sneer and moved on to harass another poor soul. As they walked home from the market, empty-handed now, Mariska said with worry in her voice, "You gave away all my coins, Janos. Now I cannot buy flour or salt or beans. We will have only vegetables from my garden to eat. How will we manage?" The Duke was horrified at what he had done, at his impulsive action that had left Mariska with nothing. "Forgive me. I acted without thinking. I could not bear to see that poor woman suffer, but I should have asked you first. It was not my money to give." Mariska smiled, though her face was troubled, and touched his arm gently. "Do not trouble yourself. You did a good thing. That poor woman needed help more than I need flour. We will manage somehow. We have vegetables and I have eggs from my chickens. We will not starve." Her forgiveness and understanding only made the Duke feel worse. He swore silently that he would punish Lord Kovacs and reform the taxation system immediately upon his return. But first he had to complete his journey through the province to see how widespread the corruption was. That evening, as the sun set, and they walked the last mile to Mariska's cottage in silence, the old woman whose taxes they had paid came hurrying after them. She was out of breath and could barely speak, but she carried a basket covered with a cloth. "For your kindness," she said, pressing the basket into Mariska's hands. "May you be blessed for your good hearts. You saved my home and perhaps my life." Inside the basket were a loaf of fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, and 3 apples. It was not much, but it was everything the old woman could spare. After she left, walking slowly back toward the village, Mariska said to the Duke with tears in her eyes, "You see, goodness always returns to us. We gave what we had, and now we have bread and cheese. We will not go hungry after all," the Duke thought, his heart full of emotion. She lives in poverty, yet she remains hopeful and kind. How can I return to my palace and forget what I have seen? How can I sit in comfort while my people suffer? I must make things right. But first, I must finish what I started. He knew now that he could not stay with Mariska forever, much as he might wish to. He had duties waiting for him, a province to reform, corrupt officials to punish. But the thought of leaving her filled him with sorrow. He had found something here that he had never had in his palace: genuine affection, honest companionship, and a kind of peace he had not known existed. One morning, about a week after the market day, as Mariska drew water from her well using the old rope and wooden bucket, the well spoke to her in a voice like water over stones. "Be warned, Mariska. Your guest is not what he seems. There is more to him than meets the eye." Mariska was startled and nearly dropped the bucket. "What do you mean, dear well? I do not understand." The well replied, its voice echoing up from the depths. "I cannot say more, for some truths must reveal themselves in their own time, but you must watch and listen carefully. The truth will reveal itself when the time is right. Do not judge harshly when it comes." Mariska was troubled by these words and stood by the well for a long moment, staring down into its dark depths. What could the well mean? What was Janos hiding? She trusted the well, for it had never led her astray, had warned her of the storm that brought Janos to her door. But what secret could he be keeping? That day she observed Janos more carefully than she had before, watching him with new eyes. She noticed his refined manner of speaking, the way he pronounced words clearly and correctly, never using the rough dialect of the peasants. She noticed the way he held himself with unconscious authority, his back straight and his head high. She noticed the softness of his hands, which even weeks of labor had not completely roughened. She noticed how he sometimes forgot himself and gave orders rather than asking, as if he were accustomed to being obeyed. That evening, as they sat by the fire and ate their simple supper of vegetable stew, she asked carefully, "Janos, you say you come from the Duke's territory. What did you do there before you began your travels? What was your occupation?" The Duke felt uncomfortable lying to her, for he had come to care for her deeply and hated the deception. He said, choosing his words with care, "I worked in service to a noble house. I managed certain affairs and attended to matters of governance. It was important work." Mariska pressed gently. "What sort of service? Were you a clerk? A steward?" The Duke said, and it was not a complete lie, but it was not the full truth either. "Something like that. I handled matters of importance and made decisions that affected many people." Mariska looked at him thoughtfully but did not press further. She could see he did not wish to speak of it, and she respected his privacy, but the well's warning echoed in her mind, and she wondered what truth was waiting to be revealed. The next day, Mariska went into the forest to gather mushrooms and berries, for autumn was the best time for such foraging, and she needed to build up her stores for winter. She walked deep into the woods, following paths she had known since childhood, carrying her basket and humming softly to herself. The forest was beautiful, with golden leaves drifting down from the trees and the air smelling of earth and moss. Deep in the woods, in a clearing she had never seen before, though she thought she knew every inch of this forest, she met a wise old woman who was really a forest spirit in disguise. The old woman sat on a fallen log, weaving something from reeds and grass, and looked up as Mariska approached. The old woman said in a voice like wind through leaves, "You have sheltered a great man in your humble home, child. You have shown him kindness without knowing who he was." Mariska replied, confused, "I have only sheltered a traveler named Janos who lost his way in the storm. He is a good man and has been helping me with my cottage." The old woman smiled, her ancient face creasing with wisdom. "He is more than he appears, but his heart is true. He has learned much from you, lessons he needed to learn. When the truth is revealed, as it soon will be, do not turn away in anger. Judge him not by his deception but by his character. See the man he has become, not the title he was born to. Mariska was confused and troubled. I do not understand your words, grandmother. What truth? What deception? The old woman gave her a beautiful embroidered cloth folded carefully. Take this. When the time comes, you will know what to do with it. Trust your heart, child. It will guide you true. Then, before Mariska could ask anything more, the old woman vanished into the trees like mist in the morning Sunday. Mariska returned home with her basket of mushrooms and berries and the mysterious cloth tucked carefully inside. She showed the cloth to Janos that evening, unfolding it by the firelight. It was beautiful, with intricate embroidery in silver and gold thread. But the pattern was strange, and she could not quite make out what it depicted. Janos examined it with interest. Where did you get this? It is very fine work. Mariska told him about the old woman in the forest, and he frowned thoughtfully but said nothing. That night, Mariska hid the cloth away carefully and wondered what it all meant. Several days later, on a bright morning with frost glittering on the grass, a nobleman on a fine horse arrived at Mariska's cottage. He wore rich clothes and was accompanied by 2 guards. He called out in a voice accustomed to command, I am Lord Andras, advisor to the Duke. I am searching for the Duke who has gone missing on his journey through the province. Have you seen anyone pass this way? A young man traveling alone? Mariska's heart stopped, the blood draining from her face. The Duke? She called back, her voice shaking. What does he look like, my lord? The nobleman described him in detail, his height, his dark hair, his gray eyes, the particular way he carried himself, and Mariska realized with shock that he was describing Janos, her Janos. The man who had been living in her cottage for nearly a month. The man she had come to care for deeply. The nobleman continued. He has been traveling in disguise to investigate complaints about his stewards. He has been gone for many weeks, and there are urgent matters that require his attention at the palace. The province needs its duke. If you have seen him, please tell me. Mariska stood frozen, unable to speak, her mind spinning with confusion and shock. The duke stepped out from behind the cottage where he had been chopping wood. He had heard the horse approaching and knew his time had come. Lord Andras, he called out. What brings you here? I am surprised you found me in this remote place. The nobleman bowed deeply from his saddle. Your Grace, thank all the saints. We have been searching for you for weeks. There are urgent matters that require your immediate attention. The nobles are growing restless, and there are decisions that only you can make. Mariska stood frozen at her doorway, her world tilting on its axis. Your Grace? The nobleman called him Your Grace? Janos was the Duke? Her Janos, who had milked her cow and mended her fence and eaten her simple food, was the Duke, the ruler of the entire province? She felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet, as if everything she had known was suddenly revealed as a lie. The Duke dismounted and approached Lord Andras, speaking in a voice that carried the weight of command, a voice Mariska had never heard him use before. How did you find me? I told no one where I was going. Lord Andras replied, We tracked your movements through the villages, Your Grace, asking questions and following rumors. It took time, but we persevered. The Duke turned to Mariska, his face full of sorrow and regret, and knelt before her on the muddy ground. Mariska, I must tell you the truth. I am Duke Janos of the northern province. I came to your cottage that stormy night, not knowing who you were, only seeking shelter from the storm. I stayed because I wanted to learn how my people truly lived, to see the truth of their suffering with my own eyes. I deceived you about my identity, and for that I am deeply sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Mariska felt tears spring to her eyes, hot and bitter. All this time you lied to me? Every day we spent together you were lying? The Duke said, his voice breaking. I never lied about what mattered. Everything I said about admiring you, about caring for you, about finding peace here, that was all true. I fell in love with you, Mariska. That is the truest thing I have ever said. Mariska stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. You are a duke and I am a peasant. We live in different worlds, as far apart as the stars and the earth. You should have told me the truth. I deserved to know who you were. How can I trust anything you said?" The Duke rose to his feet. "I know. I was wrong to deceive you. But please believe that my feelings were genuine. You showed me what truly matters in life. You taught me to see beyond title and wealth." Lord Andras spoke urgently. "Your Grace, we must return immediately. There are matters of state that cannot wait," the Duke said to Mariska, his voice full of desperation. "I must go. My people need me, and I have been gone too long. But I will return, Mariska. Please wait for me. Please forgive me." Mariska turned away, unable to speak, tears streaming down her face. The Duke mounted his horse beside Lord Andras, and they rode away with the guards following, leaving Mariska alone with her confusion and heartbreak and shattered trust. After the Duke departed, riding away on his fine horse toward his palace and his duties, Mariska wept. She sat on the ground beside her cottage and wept as she had not wept since her parents died. She felt betrayed and foolish. "How could I have been so blind?" she asked herself, her voice choked with tears. "How could I not have seen the truth? He was always too refined, too gentle, too well-spoken to be a common traveler. I was a fool to believe him." Her 3 chickens gathered around her, clucking sympathetically, pressing close to her as if trying to comfort her. Even her cow Daisy mooed sadly from the shed, as if sensing her mistress's distress. The willow tree by the well spoke in its rustling voice. "Do not judge him too harshly, dear child. He may have deceived you about his name and his title, but he did not deceive you about his heart. The man who worked beside you, who laughed with you, who ate your simple food with gratitude that was his true self?" Mariska replied bitterly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "What does it matter? He is a duke and I am nobody. A poor peasant girl who lives alone and spins wool for pennies. We can never be together. He will return to his palace and marry some noble lady, and he will forget all about the peasant girl who took him in during a storm. It was all just an adventure for him, a story he will tell at court to amuse the nobles." The willow tree said gently, "Life is full of surprises, child. Do not close your heart to possibility. Love does not see rank or title. It sees only the soul." But Mariska could not be comforted. She sat by the well until the sun set, then dragged herself back to her cottage. She returned to her daily work, spinning wool, tending her garden, feeding her animals, but now the cottage felt empty and cold without Janos's presence. She had grown so accustomed to having him beside her, to hearing his voice, to seeing his smile. She missed him terribly, and that made her even angrier at herself. At night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he would truly return or if he had forgotten her already. She touched the embroidered cloth the forest spirit had given her and wondered what it meant, what she was supposed to do with it. When the Duke arrived at his palace after the long ride back, he was greeted by his advisors and servants who had been desperately worried about his long absence. "Your Grace," they exclaimed, bowing deeply and talking all at once. "Where have you been? We feared the worst. We thought you might have been killed by bandits or lost in the wilderness. Thank the heavens you are safe," the Duke said wearily, for the journey had been long and his heart was heavy. "I have been traveling among my people, learning truths that I should have known long ago. I have seen how they suffer, how they struggle to survive under the weight of taxes and corrupt officials. I have seen cruelty and hardship that should never exist in my domain. I have been blind, and that blindness ends today." He immediately summoned Lord Kovacs, the cruel steward he had encountered at the market. Servants rushed to fetch him, and within the hour the man stood before the Duke in the great hall, bowing and scraping. Lord Kovacs stammered nervously, "Your Grace, I am honored by your summons." "How may I serve you?" the Duke said coldly, his voice like iron. "You have been bleeding my people dry with excessive taxes and showing no mercy to those who cannot pay. I witnessed your cruelty with my own eyes." Lord Kovacs turned pale. "But your Grace, I was only collecting what was owed." The Duke interrupted, his voice rising with barely controlled fury. "You were collecting far more than necessary and keeping much of it for yourself. I have reviewed the accounts. The numbers do not match. You have been stealing from the people and from me. You are hereby stripped of your position and will be tried for theft and cruelty. Guards will escort you to the dungeons." Lord Kovacs fell to his knees, begging for mercy. But the Duke was unmoved. Guards came and dragged the protesting steward away. The Duke then called together all his advisers and stewards and said in a voice that brooked no argument, "From this day forward, the taxes will be reduced by half. No one will be punished for inability to pay. Any steward found taking more than his due will be severely punished. We will help the people, not oppress them. This is my decree, and it will be obeyed." The Duke worked tirelessly in the weeks that followed, barely sleeping, driving himself to exhaustion as he reformed his province from top to bottom. He appointed honest men to replace corrupt officials, carefully investigating each candidate's character. He ordered repairs to roads and bridges that had been neglected for years, putting people to work and paying them fairly. He established grain stores in every village for times of famine, ensuring that no one would starve when harvests failed. He decreed that no child should go hungry, establishing programs to provide food for the poorest families. He reduced taxes to levels that people could actually afford to pay, and he established courts where people could appeal if they felt they were being treated unjustly. His advisers were amazed at his transformation, at his sudden deep concern for the welfare of common people. "Your Grace," they said, "you have changed. What happened during your journey to make you care so deeply about these reforms?" The Duke replied, staring out the window at his beautiful palace gardens. "I learned what it means to live with nothing, to struggle for every meal, to go to bed cold and wake up uncertain if you will survive another day. And I met someone who showed me that true nobility comes from character, not from title. She had nothing but gave everything. She is the finest person I have ever known." Every night he thought of Mariska, lying in his grand bed in his luxurious palace. He remembered her kindness, her contentment despite poverty, her generous spirit that never counted the cost of helping others. He remembered working beside her in the garden, the satisfaction of honest labor. He remembered sitting with her by the fire, listening to her gentle voice tell stories of her childhood. His heart ached with longing. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, a wise woman who had ruled as regent before he came of age, noticed his melancholy. She found him one evening staring into the fire in his private chambers. "What troubles you, my son? Why do you look so sad when you have accomplished so much?" The Duke said quietly, "I have fallen in love with a peasant girl, but I deceived her about my identity, and she may never forgive me. I think of her every day, every hour." The Dowager Duchess said, "If she is worthy of your love, if she has captured the heart of my son, then you must go to her and make things right. Do not let pride or fear of rejection keep you from happiness." As autumn turned to winter and the first snows began to fall, Mariska struggled to keep warm in her small cottage. The firewood ran low, for she had not gathered as much as usual, distracted as she had been by Janos's presence and then by her heartbreak. She had no money to buy more wood, having given away her earnings to help the old woman at the market. Her vegetable garden was bare, stripped by frost, and her stores of food were nearly empty, for she had been sharing with Janos and had not planned for winter alone. She had hoped the Duke would return as he had promised, but as the weeks passed with no word, no message, no sign, she began to believe he had forgotten her entirely. "He is probably preparing to marry some noble lady," she thought bitterly. "He has probably forgotten the peasant girl who sheltered him. It was all just a passing fancy, a momentary attraction born of unusual circumstances." One bitter cold morning, when ice crystals formed on the inside of her window and her breath made clouds in the frigid air, she went to the well to draw water, but found it frozen solid. She could not break through the ice, no matter how hard she tried. She went to chop firewood, but her old axe, weakened from years of use, broke in half when she swung it. The axe head flew off and landed in the snow, useless. She sat down on her doorstep, wrapped in her thin shawl, and wept with despair. "What will I do? I have nothing left. No firewood, no food, no money, no way to survive the winter. I will freeze or starve before spring comes." Just then, the willow tree, its bare branches covered with snow, spoke in a voice thin with cold. "Do not despair, child. Help is coming. Hold on just a little longer." But Mariska could not see how help could possibly come. She had no family, and the villagers were all struggling with their own survival. That night she went to bed hungry and cold, pulling her thin blanket around her and shivering uncontrollably. She thought, Perhaps I should go to the village tomorrow and seek work in someone's household as a servant. I cannot survive the winter alone like this. Pride will not keep me warm. The next morning, as dawn broke gray and cold over the frozen landscape, Mariska heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked out her frosted window and saw a grand procession coming down the path, 3 carriages and a dozen soldiers on horseback and servants in livery. At the head rode the Duke, dressed in fine clothes of deep blue velvet trimmed with fur, wearing his ducal coronet of gold and jewels that glittered in the weak winter sunlight. Mariska's heart leaped with joy and fell with fear at the same time. He had returned. But why? What was he doing here with such a grand procession? She quickly tried to make herself presentable, smoothing her worn dress and tying back her hair, but she knew she looked terrible, thin from hunger, pale from cold, dressed in rags. The Duke dismounted from his horse and approached her cottage, his fine boots crunching in the snow. Mariska opened the door and stood in the threshold, trying to appear dignified despite her worn dress and her thin face and her trembling from cold. "Your Grace," she said formally, using his title as a barrier between them. The Duke winced at the formality, at the distance in her voice. The Duke removed his golden coronet, holding it in his hands like a man removing his hat in the presence of something sacred, and knelt before her in the snow. "Mariska, I have come to beg your forgiveness. I deceived you about my identity, and that was wrong, but I never deceived you about my feelings. These past weeks without you have been torture. I have thought of nothing but you. Every reform I have made, every change I have implemented, I did it thinking of you, of what you would want me to do." Mariska felt tears in her eyes, hot against her cold cheeks. "Why did you come back? We belong to different worlds. You are a duke, with duties and responsibilities. I am nobody, a poor peasant. There is no place for me in your world," the Duke said passionately. "I want to make your world mine. I want to bring your values, your kindness, your compassion to my world and change it. If you will have me, if you will forgive me, I want to share my life with you." The Duke reached into his fine velvet cloak and pulled out a simple ring made of silver, unadorned by jewels. "Mariska, I do not offer you this ring as a duke to a peasant. I offer it as Janos to the woman I love. Will you marry me? Will you be my duchess, my wife, my partner in all things?" Mariska was stunned, unable to speak for a moment. "Marry you? But I am nobody. Your nobles will never accept me. Your people will mock you for choosing a peasant bride. You will be shamed," the Duke said earnestly, still kneeling in the snow. "I care nothing for what others think. You taught me what truly matters in life: kindness, honesty, contentment, and love. You showed me how to be a better man, a better ruler. Without you, I am just a man with a title, someone who sits in a palace and signs papers. With you, I am complete. With you, I can truly serve my people as they deserve to be served." Mariska felt her resolve weakening, her heart warring with her mind. "But I have nothing to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no fine clothes, no education in courtly ways. I cannot read or write. I do not know how to dance or play music. I will embarrass you at court. People will laugh at you for choosing me." The Duke smiled, and it was the same warm smile she had seen by her firelight. "You bring everything I need. You bring your good heart, your generous spirit, your wisdom about what truly matters in life, and your love if you will give it to me. I do not want a wife who knows courtly games and political schemes. I want a wife who understands my people, who will help me rule with justice and compassion." Mariska looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his words, saw the love shining there, and felt her anger melting away like snow in spring. "I do love you," she admitted quietly. "I tried to stop, but I could not. When you left, you took something of me with you. This cottage has been empty without you. But I am frightened. I do not know if I can be what you need." The Duke stood and took her cold hands in his warm ones. "You are already everything I need. You are perfect exactly as you are. Say yes, Mariska. Say you will marry me and share my life. I promise I will never deceive you again. I promise to always be honest with you, to value your counsel, to treat you as my equal in all things." Mariska remembered suddenly the embroidered cloth the old woman in the forest had given her, the forest spirit in disguise. She said, "Wait here a moment." She went inside her cottage and retrieved the cloth from where she had hidden it away, wrapped carefully in paper. When she unfolded it in the morning light, she gasped aloud in wonder. The cloth showed an embroidered scene that had not been there before, or perhaps had always been there but invisible until this moment. It showed her cottage, rendered in perfect detail with tiny stitches. It showed a duke in fine clothes kneeling before a peasant girl in a worn dress. Above them, embroidered in gold thread that caught the light, were the words, "True love recognizes no rank." Below, in silver thread, were more words, "Let the heart choose what the mind rejects." The duke leaned over her shoulder to see, and marveled at it. "This is clearly magical, a gift from the spirits of the forest. They give us their blessing. This is a sign that we are meant to be together." Mariska felt tears streaming down her face, but now they were tears of joy mixed with residual sorrow. But there are still practical matters to consider. How can a peasant girl become a duchess? "I do not know how to behave at court. I will make mistakes. I will say the wrong things. I will embarrass you in front of important people." The duke took her face in his hands gently. "You will learn these things if you wish to, but you need not change who you are. Even if you never learn the elaborate dances or the proper titles, you will be the finest duchess this province has ever known. Do you know why? Because you understand the people, because you have lived as they live. You know their struggles, their hopes, their fears. You will help me rule with justice and compassion because you know what it means to be cold and hungry, to struggle and survive." Behind them, the servants and soldiers waited patiently in the snow. The Dowager Duchess, who had come in one of the carriages, stepped forward. She was an elegant woman with silver hair and wise eyes. "My son has spoken truly. We need someone like you at court, someone who has not forgotten what it means to be human. Say yes, child. Join our family and help us become better than we have been." Mariska looked at them all, the duke with his hopeful expression, the Dowager Duchess with her kind smile, even the servants who waited with interest and made her decision. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." The duke lifted Mariska up and spun her around in joy, both of them laughing like children. He slipped the silver ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. The servants and soldiers cheered, and the Dowager Duchess embraced Mariska warmly. "Welcome to the family, my dear." The duke insisted she come with him immediately to the palace. "I cannot bear to be parted from you another day." "But first," Mariska said, "I must say goodbye to my animals and my cottage. You must understand this place has been my home, my shelter, my entire world." She went to her 3 chickens, which had been huddling together for warmth in the cold cottage. "You have been faithful friends, and have given me eggs when I had nothing else. The duke's servants will care for you now, and you will be warm and fed." She stroked each one gently. She went to her cow Daisy in the shed and wrapped her arms around the animal's neck. "Thank you for your milk and your company. You will have a warm barn and plenty of hay where we are going." She went to the willow tree by the well, placing her hand on its trunk. "Thank you for your wisdom and your warnings. You helped me prepare for what was coming." The willow tree replied, its bare branches rustling. "Go forth and be happy, dear child. You have earned your good fortune through your kind heart. You have passed every test that was placed before you, and now you shall have your reward." Then Mariska climbed into the carriage beside the duke and the Dowager Duchess. The servants loaded her few possessions, her spinning wheel, her mother's quilt, her father's shirt, the magical cloth. As they rode away, she looked back at her humble cottage and felt both sadness and excitement. A chapter of her life was closing, and a new one was beginning. The duke held her hand. "Do not worry. Whenever you wish, we will return here. This cottage will always be yours. I will have it maintained so that it is here whenever you need it." Along the way, the procession passed through the village. The villagers came out to see what the commotion was, and when they recognized Mariska sitting in the carriage beside the duke, dressed in a warm cloak he had brought for her, they cheered. "Mariska is to be our duchess, our own Mariska who has always been so kind to us." The people rejoiced, for they knew she would be a good and just duchess who would remember where she came from. When they arrived at the palace after hours of travel, passing through great gates and driving up a long avenue lined with bare trees, The nobles and courtiers gathered in the great hall to meet the duke's chosen bride. They were shocked to see a peasant girl in worn clothes standing beside their duke, even though she now wore a warm cloak. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. A peasant? Is he mad? This is unprecedented. What can he be thinking? The Dowager Duchess came forward, elegant in her gown of deep purple velvet, and looked at Mariska with appraising eyes. Everyone fell silent, waiting to see what the Dowager would say. The Duke said, his voice firm, "Mother, this is Mariska, the woman I intend to marry. She is the finest person I have ever known, and I love her with all my heart." The Dowager Duchess studied Mariska for a long moment. Mariska stood straight, meeting her eyes despite her fear, and did not look away. Finally, the Dowager smiled. "I see wisdom in her eyes and strength in her bearing. I see kindness in her face and courage in her stance. If my son has chosen her, then I welcome her with all my heart." She stepped forward and embraced Mariska, and the nobles murmured in surprise. But some of the nobles whispered among themselves, not quietly enough, "A peasant! This is outrageous! She will bring shame upon the duchy. How can we bow to someone who milked cows and spun wool?" The Duke heard their whispers, and his face darkened with anger. He said in a voice that rang through the hall, commanding absolute silence, "This woman showed me kindness when I was lost and cold. She shared her meager food with a stranger when she barely had enough for herself. She taught me what true nobility means. Anyone who cannot see her worth is blind and a fool." The nobles fell silent, shocked by his passionate defense. The Duke continued, his voice like steel, "And I warn you now, treat her with anything less than the utmost respect and you will answer to me. She will be your duchess, and you will honor her as such. Any insult to her is an insult to me." The nobles bowed hastily, murmuring apologies and pledges of loyalty, though some remained skeptical in their hearts. The Dowager Duchess took Mariska under her wing, becoming not just a mother-in-law but a true friend and mentor. She said kindly, "Come, child, let me help you prepare for your new life. You need not be frightened. You have already conquered the hardest part. You have won my son's heart." Mariska replied nervously, "But I know nothing of court life. I will make so many mistakes." The Dowager laughed. "We all make mistakes. The key is to learn from them." She gave Mariska beautiful gowns of silk and velvet in rich colors, deep green and royal blue, and wine red, and jewels that sparkled with inner fire. But Mariska felt uncomfortable in them, tugging at the heavy fabric. "These clothes are so heavy and stiff. I can barely move. How do you walk in these things?" The Dowager Duchess laughed with genuine amusement. "You will grow accustomed to them, I promise. Eventually they will feel as natural as your old dress." She taught Mariska how to walk like a lady, with small steps and perfect posture, how to curtsy properly without losing her balance, how to address nobles with their proper titles and styles, and how to manage servants with kindness but firmness. Mariska was overwhelmed. "There is so much to learn. I will never remember it all." The Dowager Duchess said wisely, "You need not learn it all at once. Take your time. And remember, what matters most is that you remain true to yourself. My son chose you for who you are, not for who you might become." Meanwhile, the Duke was also busy. He continued his reforms, working with his council to reduce taxes further, establishing schools for peasant children so they could learn to read and write, and ensuring that justice was fairly administered throughout his lands without corruption or cruelty. At night, he and Mariska would sit together by the fire in his private chambers, just as they had in her cottage, and she would tell him about her day, the mistakes she made, the things she learned, and he would listen with love in his eyes and reassure her that she was doing wonderfully. Slowly, day by day, Mariska began to feel more comfortable in her new life. She learned the names of the nobles, the layout of the palace, the customs and ceremonies. She made friends among the younger courtiers who were charmed by her genuine kindness. And she never forgot where she came from, never let the luxury and comfort make her forget the struggles of common people. The wedding day arrived with the first warm breath of spring. The snow was melting, and the first flowers were pushing up through the cold earth. The great cathedral was filled with nobles in their finest clothes, peasants from across the province in their best garments, and common folk from the city who had come to see their duke marry his unlikely bride. Every pew was packed, and people stood in the aisles and crowded the doors to catch a glimpse. Mariska wore a gown of white silk embroidered with silver thread and patterns of flowers and vines, created by the finest seamstresses in the province who had worked day and night. On her head rested a delicate coronet of flowers and pearls, and in her hands she carried a bouquet of spring flowers. She looked like a queen from a fairy tale, transformed but somehow still herself. Her face held the same gentle kindness, the same honest expression. As she walked down the long aisle on the arm of the Dowager Duchess, who had insisted on the honor of giving her away since Mariska had no father, people whispered in awe, "How beautiful she is! How graceful! Look at her dignity!" Even those nobles who had objected to the marriage, who had whispered cruel things about her peasant origins, found themselves won over by her gentle dignity and the obvious love between her and the Duke. The Duke waited at the altar, dressed in robes of state, his face shining with joy. When Mariska reached him, he took her hand and whispered so only she could hear, "You are the most beautiful sight I have ever seen. I am the luckiest man in all the world." The priest, the same kindly old man who had known Mariska's parents, performed the ceremony with tears in his eyes. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the cathedral erupted in cheers that shook the ancient stones. Outside the church, the townspeople had gathered in the square by the thousands. They threw flowers and sang songs of celebration as the Duke and his new Duchess emerged. A great feast was held at the palace, with tables laden with food and wine, music playing and people dancing. The Duke stood and announced, "In honor of my marriage, all taxes are forgiven for 1 year. Let no one in my province go hungry or cold." The people loved him even more for this generosity, and they loved Mariska for the compassion that had inspired it. After the wedding celebrations ended and life settled into a new rhythm, Mariska said to the Duke one evening, as they sat together in their private chambers, "I want to do something for the people. I remember how cold and hungry I was last winter, how frightened I was that I would not survive. Many still suffer as I did. I cannot be happy in luxury knowing that others are struggling." The Duke, who had been reading reports, looked up with interest. "What do you propose, my wise Duchess? Tell me your thoughts." Mariska replied, her voice growing passionate, "Let us build houses for those who have none, good houses, with strong walls and roofs that do not leak. Let us establish a fund to help widows and orphans who have no one to care for them. Let us ensure that no one in our province goes to bed hungry or cold, as I once did." The Duke was deeply moved by her compassion. "It shall be done. We will begin immediately." Together, they established programs to help the poor that were unprecedented in the province's history. They built housing for the homeless, sturdy cottages similar to Mariska's old home. They created a fund that provided aid to widows, orphans, and the elderly who could not work. They ensured that every village had a store of grain for emergencies and that no one went without food in winter. Mariska herself would often visit peasant cottages, refusing to stay always in the palace despite being Duchess. She would bring food and medicine, sit and spin wool with the old women, share bread with the children, and listen to the problems of farmers and craftsmen. She never forgot how to milk a cow or feed chickens, and she was not above helping with harvests when needed. The people adored her for it. She was not like other noblewomen who looked down upon the common folk from high above. She was one of them, and never forgot it. The Duke would sometimes accompany her on these visits, and he watched her with pride and love. "You are teaching me still, Mariska, how to be a true leader through compassion and connection, not through power and distance. You show me every day how to be better." Together, they transformed the province, making it a place where justice and mercy ruled, where the powerful protected the weak rather than exploiting them. Years passed, flowing like a gentle river, and Mariska and the Duke ruled the province with wisdom and justice that became legendary throughout the land. Other provinces heard of their reforms and sought to emulate them. They had children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, who were taught from their earliest years to value kindness above rank and to treat all people with respect regardless of their station. The children would visit their mother's old cottage regularly, learning to tend gardens and feed animals, so they would never forget where their mother came from and would understand how most people lived. The duchy prospered as it never had before. The people were no longer oppressed by cruel stewards. Schools and hospitals were built in every town. Roads were repaired and trade flourished, bringing prosperity to all levels of society. One autumn day, many years after their marriage, Mariska and the Duke returned to visit her old cottage, which had been maintained exactly as she had left it, preserved as a reminder of where their story began. They sat by the fire just as they had years before, now with gray in their hair and lines of laughter around their eyes. And Mariska said, "Do you remember that stormy night when you knocked on my door, so cold and wet and desperate?" The Duke smiled, the same warm smile she had fallen in love with. "How could I forget? It was the night that changed my life. I was lost in more ways than one lost in the forest, but also lost in my purpose, in understanding what truly mattered. You showed me the way home, not just to shelter but to my true self." Mariska replied softly, "And you gave me a life I never dreamed possible. But more than that, you gave me love and partnership, and a chance to help others as I was once helped." They embraced, holding each other close as they had so many times over the years, and outside the willow tree by the well whispered to the wind in its ancient voice. And so the peasant girl and the Duke lived happily ever after, teaching all who knew them that true nobility comes from the heart, that love recognizes no rank or title, and that kindness is the greatest wealth of all. And that is the end of the tale, though their happiness continued until the end of their days.